In 2011 really was when I first kind of got obsessed with this idea of Bitcoin and the idea that you would have this digital scarce form of currency that could act like gold. This kind of just messed with my mind in a really big way. It changed everything about how I was thinking about money and investing. Bitcoin is volatile at all. I think it's extremely stable in reality, but compared to a world of things that are volatile and printed all the time, and nobody really knows exactly how many of any of these things exist, right? Never buying a piece of property unless I can convince myself I'm going to be okay holding it for 10 years. I got stuck buying property right at the very top of 2007 going into 8 and learned that lesson the hard way, holding on to property for a decade before I got back to where it was above water.
Shawn Owen joins me here today. You can learn what his team is up to. Head over to saltlending.com. And if the name doesn't break the news to everybody, we are talking about lending, but particularly lending, leveraging the blockchain and everything that's associated with it. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. Really appreciate your time here, Shawn.
Yeah, Jack, thank you so much. I think it'll be a great conversation.
Well, the obvious first question is, how did you find your way into FinTech and blockchain and this world?
Yeah, so I've always been, I think, looking back pretty clearly, very interested in futurism and optimism and just kind of imagination about what would the future look like. That kind of led into a lot of different interests over my career. It turned into a lot of learning how to operate and build businesses and be pretty entrepreneurial. At a certain point in time, it became very much tech focused. I was always interested in building computers and video games and things of this nature. The idea that you could create and build stuff digitally was kind of an early seed. But then fast forward, I spent most of my career early on building restaurants and bars and real estate focused kind of brick and mortar. A lot of that you would not have anything to do with technology per se, although everybody uses operating systems and different kind of point of sales. In 2011 really was when I first kind of got obsessed with this idea of Bitcoin and the idea that you would have this digital scarce form of currency that could act like gold. And switching from my background and being in real estate, that was all I cared about was investing in real estate. I hadn't really gotten into stocks or anything else. This kind of just messed with my mind in a really big way. It changed everything about how I was thinking about money and investing. And it was kind of like I just couldn't really think about anything else and started looking for ways to segue that investment thesis from what I had been doing, which was all cash flow and then appreciation real estate, revenue generating businesses that pay triple net leases, into what if you were just holding on to this digital value in some way that was this global store of value, this big battery, this big ledger. And along the way that turned into, wouldn't it be great if we could convince the rest of the world that this is valuable and that this is like other assets and you could treat it like a home? So thinking like a home, you always have the ability to go to the credit market, you can borrow and lend. And without that, you wouldn't really have the economy that we have. It would be very different. And so in that, it seemed like there was no way to consider Bitcoin as a piece of property. Today, that's changed. Fast forward to 2025 considerably, especially in the last, call it 12 months. But that was really kind of the starting point, switching over from just something that I'd never really thought about into, I'm going to do this all day long.
Was there a particular aha moment where the light bulb went off and you realized that this is what you needed to niche down into?
It's very interesting that I don't know for sure what it was, although I knew there was just this image in my mind of, wow, this is different and how many things will change if this is true. And most of that was around this single ledger where everybody's got to copy the same ledger. I mean, you're obviously a businessman, you're involved with all these conversations, that triple ledger accounting is quite messy. By the time you get to the end of the year and you're doing your taxes and you're mailing paper back and forth and doing all the things, it can be quite a lot of work just to get to some sense of reconciliation or settlement on the basics. And so suddenly you imagine this permanent ledger that you never have to update twice, that is a source of truth that everybody can see, but yet has some pseudo-anonymous factor to where you still have some privacy. Just kind of blew my mind, I think. But then you compound that with also a provably scarce asset, first in humankind and global, that nobody can really shut down. There's all these factors that are just really fascinating to me. I think it just kind of obsessed my mind long enough to where I just wanted to learn everything I could for as long as I could. And it's kind of been true since.
For those people that are newer to this whole concept of fintech and blockchain, could you kind of break it down for the average business owner as to how this is being done?
Sure. Yeah. Like super simple language, the easiest way you can think of the analogy. A blockchain, in my best estimate, would be we have a transaction between us. It is digital. You and I have bought and sold or traded something of value, and we want to keep a record of it. We both have the same record. And then the second we do another transaction, there's this timestamped event that chains one to the other. Because we both have a copy, neither of us can falsify the other because everybody else that has a copy also is validating that there's this permanent copy. And that's just a totally different way of thinking about it than what we normally do, but it works effective and it's very good. And so that's the blockchain side of it. Bitcoin in particular has a slightly more robust asset story, and it's become kind of the narrative of digital gold. For the best analogy, the best analogy would be everybody's kind of always thought of gold as this shiny rock that people use that's in history forever, that there's only so much of it. And so we put it in these vaults, Fort Knox and others, and we have wars about it and we make coins out of it. Is valuable. And then along comes Bitcoin. It's to take that idea to the infinite programmable version and say there's a specific amount that can never change. So it's got scarcity, it's got portability, it can transfer anywhere at the speed of light. It can be infinitely expanded because the more people that want to own it, the more that you could just divide it up into smaller pieces. It can't be turned off because everybody's got a copy. So no, not even a nuclear war would probably matter at all. It's just takes this idea of the blockchain and then really builds on top of this core value proposition to something that had never really happened before. And that's how I would tie those two together, from the just technical layer to the financial implication.
And then let's tie it to real estate, because I saw that you at one point raised 124 million for your crypto backed loans. How does that work? Like, let's say a real estate investor was interested in this type of thing. Are you providing loans directly to them so that they can,
So if you
how
think
does the
about
real
a
estate
normal
piece?
mortgage, let's say you have a piece of property that has some utility in a way that people want to borrow money in order to make it easier to get a hold of for some period of time. And then bank is happy to give you the money, or the lender, because it's got this collateral element to it. So worst case scenario, of course, nobody wants it, but if you had to, you could sell the piece of property to somebody else and refinance the debt. You could service the debt. So now take Bitcoin and say, same concept. There's a store of value. You lock it up with a different form of collateral protection, but the same thesis that as long as we have this amount, say the same value as a home, and for whatever reason you can't make the payment, we can just transfer that to somebody else and or sell off the portion of the collateral to pay off the debt. So lenders are comfortable with that. The big difference in that is that you can program this and that it's removes all kind of counterparty and friction. So it's extremely efficient comparatively if you look at the title company process. But imagine if you did take a title company and you said, we're going to put all of this on a blockchain and we're going to make this as efficient as possible. And now we're going to have this global settlement layer for records of title. And now we can still do everything we've done today, but in a much more efficient way. That would be what the concept layer is and how it functions. Bitcoin is the collateral. We think it's the best form of collateral mankind's ever had, and we think that's a better savings account. So we think it works better in a lot of different ways. However, real estate is real, and it's something as old as time, and it's something really utilitarian where everybody touches it every single day. We don't think that will ever change. We think that the dynamics of cash flow investing and the rest of the industry and the rates are all going to change. But as a principle, we're now looking at, well, where can these two kind of come together and add value to each other? And what we've been doing, coming up with, is that if you've got somebody who really believes in Bitcoin and wants to save that, and you have somebody who really believes in cash and wants more of it, we know that paradigm really well. Same thing applies if you got somebody who really wants real estate and somebody who's got bank cash to lend to go get you more cash flow on the real estate. Add these two together and you can basically gain the benefits of the collateral, perfect the nature of Bitcoin as a pristine collateral with real estate, which sometimes is not the best form of collateral in terms of short term. It can get kind of illiquid. It can become a bit of a struggle to go get all the clearance and the liens and titles from time to time. So sometimes there's a higher premium that the lender will need. They'll need more personal guarantees, assurances, letters of credit. And we think that Bitcoin can be the more with real estate that really takes this into the future, right? Originally, I was thinking it would be more on the title company and the title transfer and the blockchain, which I still believe is coming. But I think the big value, the first kind of killer app is going to be in what if we can just get better rates and unlock more liquidity and increase the velocity of money here between these two asset classes, especially now that it's becoming much more normal to think about Bitcoin in that light. And real estate's already well established. So I'm sure there's always real estate investors that are always interested in hearing about what might improve their portfolio or increase their ability to gain capital. That's kind of the sector. So in Bitcoin terms, we call it Bitcoin staking and or Bitcoin saving. This idea that you're really just trying to acquire more. In real estate, I would say it's usually the cap rate and the growth and looking at how do you leverage one safely to the other and grow a portfolio. And those two have a lot of similarities, but they also have a lot of differences that go well together, right?
Did you find that, because Bitcoin and crypto for that matter is a relatively newer concept. I found that real estate people and professionals, we're a little behind on the technology side of things. Have you found that you have to kind of do a bit of education ahead of time so that they kind of warm up to the idea?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect question actually for me. And I know that we've never spoken on this before, but I'm grinning because when I first started going out as kind of this evangelist, I was just really hyped up on this idea of Bitcoin and spreading the word. The first idea for me was to go to banks and talk to people in the hard money lending business. I was like, this is just so easy. I'll go tell them about it. We'll talk about it. We'll talk to the Department of Innovation. They'll get it, and nothing could be further from the truth, right? Like the early days was people were very interested. We'd get nice meetings set up. I'd be in there, I'd meet great people. We'd be sitting down with the bankers and the people who are doing real estate. And you'd get an hour and a half in, and then I'd start to realize, oh man, like I've just barely scratched the surface and I can't get them to stop it. They're asking the same questions I was asking about, like, what happens to this, to the point where I was like, okay, we're a little earlier than I thought. This is like 2014. We need to go to private investors. And even that's turned into being quite the hurdle to get to the point where people understood what we're talking about. And I think it was probably a combination of both. One, you're talking this tech language, right? So it's like it messes it up. Is if you could just say it's just like gold or it's just like a car, and people would believe you, it'd be a little easier, right? But they're like, but how can I perfect it? Can I live in it? I remember some of these very well-to-do smart people in real estate that knew everything there was to know about it, and they'd be looking at me just sideways, like, I don't know what you're talking about, And so it's been quite the evolution. I think the best way to think about it is don't get caught up where you're thinking there's something you don't understand. Because in fact, I bet you do. If you just take it to first principles and you abstract it a little bit, you do know what a piece of property is. Yes. And you do know what it means to collateralize or put a lien on it. And you do know what it means to write paper around it and have good title and deed and conveyance. Now imagine if we did that with something digitally and hope that they don't like lose it, but it's definitely been a hard learning lesson, I think, for everybody in a good way. And even myself included, I still learn things today that make me think I don't know as much as I thought I did when you go down the technical side. However, I do think it's really valuable just to bring it back to the utilitarian part. Like, what's the part that matters in the transaction? Where does the human get the value, right? You can spend 10 years like I have talking and learning about everything from how the chips are manufactured and what are ASICs and what's this whole thing about solving problems. And you can just kind of get lost forever. None of that actually matters in the context of, say, how would I use this in my portfolio of real estate? And so I try my best now these days to just avoid a lot of the things that would be on the technical side, unless they're absolutely critical. What matters is like, who is your counterparty and how you structuring the deal and what's your goal? What are you looking for in the long term? It's a long-winded answer, but I just got all these memories going through of the years and years I was trying to educate, and it just didn't really work.
Yeah, it goes back to just kind of sales training to a certain extent, where we typically need to talk to the problem that you're
Yep.
solving versus as nerds, we kind of go down that rabbit hole and we can,
Yep.
my wife eyes gloss over, let alone and another investors.
You know much about crypto or Bitcoin or anything? I mean,
Just
most
enough.
people, once they just enough to know it's got bad naming and bad marketing, probably. Especially in the old days, it was like every time somebody would come up with a term and it would make sense technically, you'd be like, oh, not again. Change it fast, please. Because as soon as somebody starts talking about this too much, that's going to be the news cycle and it'll stick forever, and nobody will know what the heck we're talking about.
You also have to do the hurdle. But, I see Bitcoin. You mentioned Bitcoin. It's on the rise again, but there was a little instability there for a while.
That's an interesting topic. So I found it to be really fascinating to just ponder on this idea that it's very volatile, right? Price goes up, price goes down, and it's very volatile because there's this liquid market.
Hmm.
But what's more interesting to think about is that you have one thing that is very known, that's transparent, that you know exactly how much can exist in a degree that we've never really experienced in any other asset class ever, right? We've never had this level of certainty on anything on the books ever. And so Bitcoin's really like profound in that way. And then you start wondering, or you ask the question, well, what is the volatile thing here? Like, which one is it that's actually volatile? And if you switch the denominator, meaning that you say, I'm going to measure whatever's going on in Bitcoin, you see less volatility, but it's very foreign. It feels like you're dealing with a foreign currency. It's not natural for an American like me. It's like very hard, even after all the years, because I'm so used to thinking with everything in dollar signs, two decimals and dollars. Like we just say it like it's ingrained, right? Everything is priced in dollars. And so I don't actually think that Bitcoin is volatile at all. I think it's extremely stable in reality, but compared to a world of things that are volatile and printed all the time, and nobody really knows exactly how many of any of these things exist, right? It's very opaque all over the market. Nobody's tracking every single dollar down into every hedge fund and everything. It's not possible. And so you ask yourself, which one of these is really volatile, right? And it starts to change your thinking pretty quick. And you start to kind of have a little bit more certainty on the thing that's less volatile, which I find to just be a good experiment for anybody who's interested to think through that if you're getting involved with Bitcoin from the get-go. Otherwise, you get kind of scared with these big swings in price that don't really matter. Imagine if all the mortgages out there had this ticker that everybody was looking on their phone with their house and it was up and down, up and down. People would freak out, right? You'd lose your mind because we're just used to kind of some consistency. And so that's what throws you off when you're looking at something that's got that price chart, which can be very deceiving. It's really not the best metric to look at with Bitcoin.
Well, we've seen entire companies and industries based on the concept of shove money in, set it and forget it.
Mhm.
Financial planners, they make a living doing this, where we put money blindly into a 401k or an IRA and, dollar cost average that. But if we would actually use the magnifying glass like people do today with Robinhood and Coinbase and a few of these other apps where you're actually seeing the individual coin or the individual stock fluctuate, that likely causes the fear.
That's absolutely right. That's for sure the case. And I would actually say on that note, not financial advice, of course, but worth considering. I always tell myself, never buying a piece of property unless I can convince myself I'm going to be okay holding it for 10 years. I got stuck buying property right at the very top of 2007 going into 8 and learned that lesson the hard way, holding on to property for a decade before I got back to where it was above water. And so it kind of stuck with me. This is not a short-term thing. It's better to think about it over the long term. Bitcoin is absolutely that thing. Like if you can buy it, put it away, forget it exists, you're going to really not experience any of that kind of fear and uncertainty and the stuff that's just not going to serve you well. It's really good advice from the standpoint of if you already own it, just like with the home, you would not want, if I'm going to be living in my home for a long time, if I want to own this for 10 years, why do I care? Right? Like it doesn't actually matter in real terms, but it can cause you a lot of stress. I would never advise anybody to think in short-term thinking with Bitcoin. I think it can be very attractive to get excited about, but it will also lure you into this unnecessary trap that doesn't apply to almost any of the good use cases. Just like with real estate, you don't really want to think about flipping your house 2 days after you buy it. It doesn't make any sense. Bitcoin is like that kind of asset.
And diamond
It's
hand.
absolutely.
Just to remind everybody, head over to saltlending.com, learn a little bit more there, because there's a lot of content there that will kind of shed more light on this. We're really going to be only touching the tip of the iceberg regarding this technology and what we're talking about here today. But Shawn, that does lead me to, like, how do people get involved? They can either come to you for lending, or can they get involved becoming a backer in some way?
Both. So, saltlending.com is a good resource. I would agree. The best place you can find me and the team and everybody else. What we offer and what we stand for is really simple. It's that there are people that want to have a better future and they want wealth for tomorrow. And so they're looking for that North Star of, I want my effort to go into savings and they want to build that. And that's really two different kinds of people. There's people that only in Bitcoin, but they need cash to go spend in their life. And then there's people that live in cash and are used to real estate, but need more ways of finding yield and are interested in forms of collateral. Those two usually end up crossing paths and that one become one person with just different time horizon. And that, most people have an experience where they will touch both, and be on both sides of that and we're in the middle. So we service all of that. We're happy to talk to anybody. We have investment opportunities for accredited investors, getting started packages for people who are just learning. We do have 24, the ability to service any kind of support. We'll set up calls and talk to people. It's one of the things we kind of pride ourselves on, given that there is this learning curve and it is technology, and we're not asking people to necessarily have to go learn how to be technical, but rather just how to start the process and have a conversation and learn what the benefits are. We call either the Bitcoin advantage or the net benefits of wealth. That was the oldest recorded form of wealth preservation for humans that we used both for saving our food. We would also use it for salaries and trade. And so we thought it was a good name for something that's kind of globally used and for saving your money. But at the end of the day, it's really another tool that you can explore for ways to save your wealth for tomorrow.
Right. You started this endeavor in 2014.
Yeah, in the early days of Bitcoin, we didn't really know what it was going to be, and neither did anybody else in the regulatory world. The concept was, if this works out, this could become a new global currency. But today it's more like a baseball card and people are just avidly collecting it. And over the process of that, you had exchanges and then you started to get custody and wallets. And then as it built out, we were like, you need lending, and you move forward, and it started to become very clear when transaction fees started to become more prevalent. And it was really obvious that everybody wanted to save it more than they wanted to spend it, that we were nowhere near this currency kind of paradigm. And that was really the light bulb, is that we're a bridge to go from here to wherever we're going. And maybe someday it does become a global currency. Maybe it continues to only be a collateral asset on a balance sheet. But either way, we're going to need tools built around it that enable this. That was kind of an evolution up to when we formally founded from ideation in 2015 and kind of seeding it to 2016, formal Delaware Corp, raised real money, and then 17 kind of launched first initial MVP. And ever since, we've just kind of been iterating through the ups and downs. And when crypto and Bitcoin were a good thing or a bad thing, it's kind of had its favor in and out depending on what's going on in the learning curve. Right now, it's an excellent time, I think, because we're finally getting to a place where it even kind of blows my mind, the adoption curve, how fast it's going and what kind of extent we're seeing on the balance sheet adoption. The Bitcoin treasury management companies, the sovereigns, even the United States and other countries are looking at holding onto this as an asset. And who knows, maybe it does turn into a currency long term, but that was kind of what determined. We're not quite there yet on that front, but the use case is definitely there.
When you were building this business, what has been the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge, bar none, 100% has been in educating the regulators and the world. But I would really say, from the regulatory lens, what is a good thing and what's a bad thing, and there have been people who have misunderstood and or had businesses that have failed. And so this narrative has been so challenging. I think we've finally hit a really good pace, to be honest with you, where there's enough of a depth of knowledge now that some of these pain points I'm talking about are not there. But I can't even tell you just how hard it has been to go from this is an idea to everybody thinking this might be the next thing that's a terrorist thing. This could just be total scammers. This could be, who knows? We don't even know what to do. So what do you mean write rules about it? No, or these are all securities. The regulators started fighting about it. It was like, no, it's going to be a currency we rig. No, the other guy says, no, it's a security we rig. And so that has been very difficult. And I'm very proud to say, kind of, and happy that just over the last, call it 12 months, I think there's been some serious legislation in the US and some serious narrative that's enabled a whole new conversation to really allow for us to kind of let the good companies do this the right way and let people really kind of experience this in a safe way. Because that's the whole point, is that it should be a better technology. It should be a better way of doing things. So the last thing you want to see is that get abused in any way. That's been the hardest part, is when you do see bad actors, and somebody's off in South Korea and they hack somebody's money, and you can't get it back. It's just super frustrating. And that's a bad look for everybody. But that was also true of every new technology that's ever come along. You get these early adopters that will come in there and try to figure out how to exploit it. I feel like we've surfed past those days finally. Good
Well,
question.
no, I just find it interesting. We talk about the bad actors, but sometimes I'm afraid of our government. We get a situation where we get legislators trying to pass things because, and frankly, they don't understand. They don't understand
No,
it, and
that's
it's
true. This is such a good question. I feel like I could talk to you on this one for a long time, just if you ever wanted to talk. But kindred spirits on both technology, automation, and thinking of things in that light.
Mhm.
I feel like we really, as a society, are going to have to come to face this problem head on, because it affects every single one of us. We know that there is this bloat and this big chasm between the person who's representing us and what we're seeing up close in front. And it's definitely not great that we're worried about our own tax dollar money going to government funded things that are setting us up for this inefficient, bad process of governance in the first place. And you see it in everything from, I pick on the little counties sometimes that are still making you fax in the wet signature that then you fax, and you're like, but why did you make me wet signature if you just turn it into a digital copy? Have you ever heard of PDF? And so I pick on them a little bit, but we have so much of this where the rules are like two or three coming in at a time in these big new bills. Yet we're not pulling the old stuff out fast enough and saying, wait a minute, like this stuff over here just doesn't make any sense. Some of the rules in the accreditation, I pick on that one too, right? The accreditation of investors is like a well-intended rule, like most laws always are, with unintended consequences that aren't good for a lot more people than they are. And so, I mean, I've personally experienced a lot of loss and pain and just suffering. Everybody's got a slightly different rule. And so you're fingerprinting yourself, 15 ways to Sunday and filling applications over and over and over, stuff that doesn't make any sense. And then you get to the bottom of what the rule is for. And it's like, well, this is actually causing the thing that we don't want. There's a lot of that. And I do think this is a particularly pressing point when it comes to blockchain, not as a panacea, but as one more tool. Just like I think you could use everything right or wrong. AI is now the new big one, right? But blockchain is kind of the counter to that. And those two are definitely worth understanding the right way and the wrong way. Will we write the right rules around them? I don't know. With what I saw with blockchain, it took quite a lot longer than it should have. I'm hoping that is not like a long tail where it's always like that. And it's when you see that it can be so much better, you just want to go scream and say, like, why don't we just change this?
Hmm.
It's a hard one to solve. That's a good one.
Yeah, well, it's a valid one. I mean, it's crazy to think that my teenage kids would likely know more about crypto than most of our government officials or federal government officials.
100%. And the same goes for like social media and AI and the rest, right? Like that, they probably know more about Uber and how to use TikTok and Instagram than the regulators do by a lot.
I got to admit, I work with this stuff on a daily basis, but I even had to have my daughter help me with TikTok yesterday.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. TikTok is like the thing I just stay away from. I'm like, I can get into a lot of these, but I just don't know that I have enough in me to go pick up another one of these social tools yet.
Well, I was just trying to make sure that I was segregating some of the content because I'm producing some of the more technical oriented stuff
Mm.
for real estate professionals. And I wanted to have a separate account for that particular purpose. And there was just for some reason, I couldn't do something on my browser, but you can do it on your phone through the
Mhm.
app. And, they deliberately keep you on your phone. They
All right.
restrict certain things that you have to do on your phone.
That's no doubt about that. The engineering that goes into attention, the economy of attention is absolutely insane. I don't think anybody intends it one way, but like, and everybody's working on how to make sure that they sell the little piece to you. And then when you stack it all together, layer on something like TikTok, do we even have a chance at all of controlling our own attention anymore?
Well, we could
I
go
would
down
care.
that rabbit hole too. Like there was even wasn't the Brave browser trying to capitalize on that and do some sort of coin with your attention?
Yeah, that's right. The basic attention token. That's it. Yeah, you're right. That's a good one. So they had a good idea actually there. And I think they did a good job actually out of all the innovators. I put myself in a category with Brave where there was a group of people who got super excited. We saw the technology. We're like, this is amazing. This is going to change everything. We ran into it. And, the only thing that really like you run head on into is in that world is suddenly everybody in the SEC world specifically was like, oh, no, 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 you can't do any of that. That's all a security. That's not technology. You need to go become an accredited investor. By the way, you guys are probably going to go to jail. And it was just like terrifying to be an entrepreneur in that space for a while. And suddenly you're getting lumped in with like this situation that was going on. But that was another one that I give credit to because they did have a real use case they were really excited about. They saw it, and I still think they are onto it. Hey, the browser is going to change. You're going to have money. The internet of money is here. You're going to be able to send information around like money in a way that is peer to peer through your browser. We should innovate. We should put the wallet in, and they did a good job of that. We should put the currency here so you have an incentive. They did a good job of that. And you, yeah, I have not met anybody ever that wasn't a crypto person that knew that. So I'm curious on even where you heard about that. But I do think that there's a microcosm, if you've ever heard of kind of the network state or this idea that networks themselves will become more valuable the bigger they are. And thus, if it was a currency, they start to self-feed and kind of have an incentive of their own. And companies are a form of this. Companies do this to a certain degree. Countries do this by decree. And most people are pretty patriotic for the most part. So they kind of do this too. Like groups like to get together. But when you apply that to a technology, Bitcoin, where you say, if this can do that, like what we started doing with SALT, standing for secured automated lending terms, was this idea that what if you just took a contract and you just said, there's no humans involved other than the two people, and you set it up at the beginning, you agree to it, and then it just goes down the river deterministically. And if you do what you said you're going to do in the contract, it executes exact. And if things go off course, then there's a way to cure, but there's no court, there's no title company, there's none of this stuff. It just removes all of the friction. That's a revolutionary idea still. And I think that is coming, right? That's what people call DeFi now, right? In a simple sense, but really it was called smart contracts, another one of these nerdy names that needs a better name eventually. But anybody that's ever signed a piece of paper knows that there's like this process that sometimes none of us want to do. Like I don't know anybody that loves filling out forms of KYC and due diligence and your name and address on 25,000 things a year. Imagine if you could automate that, but then take it a step further. Imagine that DocuSign, let's say, wasn't a company. Let's say that DocuSign was actually just a protocol and you could own it and you didn't need anybody to ask permission to buy or sell some part of it. And every time you signed an agreement, you got a bit of the revenue from anybody else that ever like participated. Suddenly you are a stakeholder in a network. And this idea of a network state, I think, is a very powerful one. Imagine Facebook now, which is bigger than many countries. What if a Facebook comes along that's decentralized and suddenly it doesn't come and go, it's just a protocol, and you can own a piece of this new network without having to go to the stock market where only some companies can get on if they're public, but any network can compete. And it doesn't matter if it's in this country or the other country. That will just completely change what it means to have borders and what it means to have securities. And like that's what's going on today, whether people recognize that or not. It's being built and that's coming. And I think that will affect everything from real estate titles to driver's license to everything else. You can imagine that the way we do things now overlap 10 years of artificial intelligence, automation, and blockchain. And our kids will live in a completely different world than we grew up in.
Well, I gotta say that I hope you eventually are seen as somebody that has really weathered this storm. You're in a situation where you're not disrupting a single industry here. There's a disruption regarding what we know in our government and our regulations. As I was in the banking industry, I know the disruption you'd be causing there, and we're doing real estate. So between those three huge bodies that move at a snail's pace, I would imagine there has been some storms that you really had to weather here so far.
I usually say in crypto, we joke that it's like dog years, but times a couple, right? Feels like time is just going so much faster when you're in an industry that is 24/7, that's automated, that's disruptive. Like right now, it feels the same way in AI. It's like every week or two, there's some new model coming out and it's some new thing. And it feels like dog years or leap years accelerated. Add on kind of the chaos of fighting with regulators and all the rest. And it's felt like decades. I can honestly say that. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't even know if I could fit all this in books. It's just been so wild on a daily basis. However, it has really started to at least start to simmer a bit, and it feels like we're finally starting to see the storm weather disappear in some smooth water. I should probably knock on some wood, but there is definitely something to just how long it takes for something to be fully adopted, and until it really gets adopted, it's still this wild, wild ride. And it has been totally wild. And you're right. It was pretty crazy to think that we just step in and disrupt the biggest institutions on the planet. Oh, this is going to change banking and government at the same time. That's a great idea. We kind of should have known better that it would be a bit of a rocky ride. Although I do take some pause and notice that today, I think people jumping in, especially these big companies, they're piling in and just buying Bitcoin and gaining the reward and benefit of it. They're not going to have that same bumpy road, I don't believe. And so I do feel like that's part of just the pioneering, that you are going to get shot with some arrows, and then the settlers come along and it's all worth it as long as you get there. We still got probably a few more battles to fight.
Well, we're seeing such an acceleration on so many fronts. You mentioned AI, but what Moore's law was, tech processing power doubles every couple of years.
Price.
I'm sorry, say again.
Yeah, the doubling of effective space, what the cost cutting in half. So you have it going in both directions.
Right. And now we're seeing AI double every 6 months.
AI is fascinating to me right now because it's a little different, right? So in the fact that technology and Moore's law is a great example, the network, like the more value that something has a network, it kind of goes from gradual to sudden, right? AI is different in that we've never had a situation where potentially the intelligence itself can get to a point where it's a feedback loop on itself. Now, as a human, we all know what that feels like. You start into some new venture, you start learning a new skill or a new game, and it's kind of like you have no idea what's going on first, and then you get your bearings and you start to practice, and pretty soon after the reps you become knowledgeable about it, and then it's like muscle memory. Well, that has never happened beyond the human life with what we've left in books and whatnot. And it definitely has compounded because we're learning by reading books of people before us. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, but we've never seen where the technology that is the book is now reinforcing itself. And with intelligence, I think that is the thing that's happening, is that we're not just writing books for the future to read. We're writing programs that are writing progress, and it's all intelligence all the way down. And so I do think we're going to see this explosion of intelligence to a point where it's going to feel like the average person that your computer is just 1,000 times smarter than you on almost anything you could ever ask it to do.
Mhm.
And that is going to be pretty fun. I think it's going to be pretty exciting. It's also pretty strange to think about, because I do think the disruption coming in what we usually perceive to be as the institutional way that we live our life, how we do our jobs, what we do for paying taxes, how we vote, is just so rapidly and radically going to change. Yet I believe what you said earlier is going to be true too, that we're still going to have people in positions of power and companies that don't want that to happen or don't know how to happen. And so you're going to see kind of this divergence happen where it's going to take off in some places and yet we'll still be living in others. I don't think anybody knows what that's really going to look like.
Well, we're such a reactionary species when it comes to anything like this. If we don't understand it, we fear it. And
It's
then
true. Do you find, are you using any AI? I'm curious. I know you love automation. You talk a lot about some of these things quite extensively, and I find a lot of value in that. Everybody's heard of ChatGPT and everything else to that degree in AI, but there's kind of a difference between using it on the daily and then just dabbling.
Mhm.
Where do you fall in that so far? Like, are you on the power, like obsessed user, or are you just starting to play with it?
Well, I'm a bit of a power obsessed user. And in
Big-
fact, I'm deploying AI receptionists right now. People, receptionists answering
Nice.
phone calls and then actually training it with the knowledge base of the business that I'm working with. So it's kind of funny and I find it entertaining anyway, because I get the transcripts of the conversations it's having with distressed homeowners, for example. And the people will call in and many times they think they're talking to a person. The voice models from 11 Labs is just crazy good.
11 Labs is great.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's a good
so
tool.
so when you have those type of conversations, and there was one instance where somebody called in and said, and the AI asked a question, and he said, "Oh, give me a second. I wrote that down. Let me find it." And the AI responded, "No problem. I'll just take your time. I'll just hang out here until you find it or something like that. It just responded to the situation.
Situational awareness is coming for sure.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? So I am also a power user, like on as much of a level as I can be, and I'm pushing the limit for sure in operational implementation. But yet I had to call into TransUnion today, just a side note, right? And
Oh, I
and
hate them.
it's one of these like, oh my, literally, it's been years since I've been so mad I wanted to yell at the phone. And it's like, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you please repeat? And I'm just like yelling at the phone. And it's terrible tech, just terrible. And it
Terrible.
reminds you of just not that long ago when every one of those auto robo kind of answering machines was dog food. It was terrible, right? It was just
Yeah.
so bad. And then living and seeing what it can be today, you're like, wow, that company is like so out of touch right now, so out of touch. I don't even ever want to call that number ever. And then I had to do 2 days in a row because they have just a broken, terrible process. And of course, I finally get to a human. It's somebody in India, and they're doing their best. They're trying, but it's just a terrible system.
Hmm.
And that literally, I know that guys like us are sitting here. You plug a few little tools together, you give it some data sources, it connects and it starts reinforcing itself. And pretty soon, it's doing a better job than you could have done, right?
Yeah. Well,
That's coming.
that's, there's workflows that you can do now where depending on the data that is coming through on the backside, if it doesn't match what you expect, you can feed it back through and have the AI correct itself. Or you can plug in a separate AI to validate the first AI.
That works pretty well, right? Not to get too technical, but because I think that's what these models are going to, these people like the service providers are going to serve up for us. They're going to keep figuring out ways to kind of let it do that for you. But right now, if you're a power user and you say, okay, I did 5 prompts in a row and one of them kind of came out a little weird. If
Mm.
you start to realize that you can just parse that, or send it off to a Slack channel or an email or something, and anytime it has this tag, it's just a matter of time before another agent can come through and you can say like, tell me what went wrong here, and then
Yep.
fix the instructions. And then you say, well, now it's just a matter of time before I can just connect that to be a little loop. And I wasn't even involved anymore. And that's not even really reinforcement learning on the level of putting it in the model. That's just you putting the scaffolding in place. Now imagine as soon as the models can figure out how to write their own scaffolding, which is starting to happen. And that
Happening
really
really
is where I see
fast.
this exploit. It's going to happen fast. I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, most people have no clue what's coming in the next couple of years. Like it's going to come way faster than people really see it unless
Yeah.
you're upfront and personal with it. And I do think it's very exciting. It is a bit scary. Even I get a little scared every once in a while, but it's pretty exciting. So like, I like that topic for sure. Do you find any value in any of these where you're using a particular tool that you automate or that you orchestrate, or are you still kind of, how do you go about it? Like the 11 Labs is a good example. Like it can do some amazing work on its own, but if you
Mhm.
string it up to some stuff, it's even that much more of a tool.
Yeah. Well, I default to a few handful of tools. You learn that there's some strengths with some and others.
Yeah,
But
pick your favorite.
N8N is always going to be I always kind of
Very good.
default to that just because there's more granular aspects to each of those nodes that you can set up. But
Yeah,
what I think is especially interesting right now, and I hate to be a futurist here, but this is like the first time in my lifetime where we have seen, I don't think I've seen such a disruption that is,
I've,
we're at the beginning of it.
I'm glad you are, because this is fun. And then with whatever time we have you coming off whenever, but the future stuff is
Well, I could
great.
just, so this is the first time where small business can implement something relatively inexpensively and beat out
Yep.
TransUnions and
Wait.
big companies because they
Yep.
move so slow.
Yep.
You have
Totally.
a couple of years right now of taking advantage of the situation.
That's right. And so it's like, the normal paradigm here in the tech world is that the VC companies will come along and they'll fund these little startups because they're like, chances are they might not make it, but if something is going to disrupt, it's going to be these little speedboats that can come in and just like rapidly pivot. And if one of them catches fire, it's going to take out this big company that won't see it coming. What you just said is so true, because now it doesn't even take a seed funded $50 million or $10 million check to get there. It's suddenly whoever, anywhere in the world with whatever small amount of funding to get going, or just their ingenuity. And like, I think a lot about this idea of a 1 person or 3 person core, and what will it look like when you can just piece by piece build the little Legos, and pretty soon you have a fairly autonomous business model. I think that's going to be a huge thing that's going to
Right.
disrupt, but it's going to disrupt in about a 10,000x more disrupt level than it used to. Because it used to have, you had to be in Silicon Valley. You had to know some tech guys. You had to at least have at least one good guy write you a check. And you had to at least be able to like go in there and really set up shop and go into town. You can do this from your anywhere now.
Was leading into my second prediction. Our first one-person company billionaire.
Mm-hmm. I want to be that guy, by the way. I mean, it's a lofty goal because I already have a company and I'm trying to pivot, but I think it's just such a great goal. And I think, I'm an entrepreneurial kind of futurist looking guy. So how many people are there that are younger than me, that are more aspire? They're like, I'm doing it. I think there's tons of people right now that have that idea in their head. And that is the coolest thing. Like even people that, myself included, who had long since not had the time to mess around with code or get into any of this stuff real technical, because you just get so abstracted that you're dependent on just needing to do your job and let other people do theirs. I've been so reinvigorated by this ability to go in and actually do stuff without having to go through that whole process of scope and work and wait 3 or 4 months to get like a prototype deck. And that's all out the window. And it's fun. And I'm seeing people that I was not even expecting that will have these little stories in my company. They'll be like, I just figured out how to go write this Python thing and I haven't coded in 15 years. And I'm like, that's awesome. So it's so empowering. And I think it's going to be on such a level that I lean towards the optimistic view. I know there will be the pessimistic versions that all play out, and somewhere in the middle will be where we land. But I lean towards that optimistic view where it's not that this is necessarily just going to replace people and it's all doom and gloom. It's that everybody's now you can take all those crazy ideas you had and you can throw them to the wind and just test it out. And who knows, maybe you're going to hit one out of the park, and you don't have to like sit there in your little cubicle. You can just take a swing.
Well, that's just, vibe coding is a real thing, between Lovable and Cursor and Claude. There's a number of tools now that you can get a MVP set up in a weekend.
Totally. And you should, because the way of doing it the formal way still has tons of value, right? Not to take anything away from real structured rigor and process and writing requirements and doing perfect pixel designs, all of that has its place. But for just getting an idea before it dies out in there into the wild and actually being able to experience what it has and see if it can take off and fly, never has there been a time like this. You could never do this before. It's so empowering. Like, it's so much fun.
Well, Shawn, we're closing in on almost an hour here. This is probably the longest podcast I've had in a while.
Thank you. I didn't mean to.
What a great way to end the week. This was a great conversation. I really had a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too.
Is there anything else we should have tried to hit on before we close out the episode, though?
Just for your listeners, I guess, and for us to come back to, I'd love to speak on any topics anytime. I'm always interested to find where we can help people who are getting new to something learn and get onboarded the right way. It's new for us to really be spearheading towards this real estate world and Bitcoin. And I think it's pretty fascinating. So if anybody heard anything about that and was interested, I'd love to talk to you. I've loved the conversation. I wasn't sure if we'd be able to take it, but I think it was a great conversation. Happy to pick up and chat about stuff anywhere with anybody that finds any of this stuff interesting.
saltlending.com. You can find more information there. I'll have that as a clickable link in the show notes, but if you're ready, we'll jump into the rapid fire and close out the episode.
Let's do it.
What lie do entrepreneurs often tell themselves?
That they can make it. That's a bad one, but I think you have to lie to yourself to be an entrepreneur somewhere. You have to say it's worth taking the risk that maybe you're lying to yourself. Because I know I've lied to myself a bunch of times, but it was because of that I made a lot of mistakes and failed and learned a lot of stuff. And it's also because of that I've hit some things that were pretty noteworthy that I would not have been able to if I didn't just believe. And so it's a fine line between lying to yourself and believing in yourself, right? And it's only in retrospect that you can judge yourself, and you shouldn't. You should only just say, I was going to learn something anyway. So I'm glad I learned something being an entrepreneur and doing what I thought I believed at the time, because now I know something that I didn't know before. But I do think every entrepreneur by definition has to lie to themselves a little bit just to totally believe, just the audacity to some of the ideas we have.
Well, I'm sure that there's people in your lives that came right out and told you were crazy, or that this was,
totally. And I was like, yeah, whatever.
Well, you got to be
you got to pick your flavor.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Never sell Bitcoin ever for any circumstantial reason, period. Do not sell your Bitcoin. So I would tell myself, I just smack myself every single day. Don't even think about it. Don't
Yeah.
don't even think about it.
Do you have a book recommendation?
So I'm writing a little book that's coming out here. It's called The Bitcoin Advantage. So it'll come out in the fall. And so I'm a little obsessed with both writing and then reading just everything I can possibly consume in the form of ChatGPT about learning code and AI. So it's interesting that you bring the book up because my historical track record is I read tons of books, tons of them. Like I was almost always on Audible and
Mhm.
just knocking them down. I have found a trend where now I get more of that from YouTube and way more of that from using AI. And I find that real fascinating because I can't give you a current book I'm reading. I can give you great books I've read, but I have my habit changed and I didn't even mean to change it. So I'm not reading a book right now at all. And I think I should be, but I don't, it's very strange because just like the browsers are changing and the whole idea of information and knowledge is changing, I'm not sure that books are going to exist in the future. I'm not actually
That's a good
sure. Like
point.
I
And,
said,
and you just caught me. I just realized what I was doing. And I have a custom GPT that like a project, right? And
yep,
in
yep,
GPT. And when I find the necessary PDF of a book that I actually value, I
you
put it
grab
in the
it.
project
Go.
files and then I
Yep.
ask it questions.
That's exactly what I do too. It's getting easier and easier to just grab links, drives, docs, whatever. I think that pretty soon it's just going to be doing that for you. Imagine we all have a phone. What if the app store goes away and you don't need apps anymore? You just talk to this device and it builds and does whatever. I think that's not outside of reality over some
That's
period of time.
very good. I mean, you saw OpenAI's announcement, right? ChatGPT, the five announcement.
Yeah. Have you used the 5 with the agent?
Yeah, I've used the 5 with the agent. I sometimes still go back to 4.0 and 4.1 on
Yep.
occasion, but
Yep. There's
the
glitches in.
the what I thought was crazy is that, somebody just the demo was they built a Tetris game,
Yeah.
just talking to it a few sentences. And chess is another example, but it's pretty crazy how fast it's that piece of it's evolving. And
I
it's just
agree.
right
So like
there in the ChatGPT browser window.
there's this thread, right? Like that podcast, like it used to be a thing where there was you could count all the podcasts originally, right, in the podcast section, and then it became more and more and more, and then everybody had a channel, and it kind of distributed. I think that we're getting to the point now where like I have a podcast, you have a podcast, or has a podcast, and it's becoming more of like so studio available. It's one example of the same trend, like where rather than just having your certain feed, it could be this mix match of everything where the way that we consume information and understand how to learn is just totally changing because the
Mhm.
device structure is totally changing. All the deterministic code and the way computers work is still there. But now we have this strange new world where non-deterministic odd things can happen, like what happens with humans, like in real life, where it's not predictable. It's not, you can't make it exactly black and white. It's just, you never know exactly what somebody's going to say. And I think this idea, I'm glad you asked that question with the book, is going to be true of so many things where we'll look back and at some point in time and there'll be questions that you would never ask in the future, right? They'll just be totally different questions we'll ask.
So I know this question is going to come right out of left field for you, Shawn, but do you have any concern of collapse, LLM collapse, in the fact that everybody's producing so much content using these? Now it's going to start to consume itself.
I don't. I
No
actually think,
original content being added to the mind.
well, I have a different fear, right? I don't have a fear of that collapse at all. In fact, I think that what I've seen in practice is that when you take your own model and you start building some infrastructure around it, and then you iterate a little bit, and then you give it a little bit more fine tuning or some new knowledge that it was on its own knowledge, but you kind of guided it a bit, it becomes better. I think that actually the synthetic data and taking the people out of the loop is a significant reason for why the models are getting so much better. So I don't fear that at all. I do fear that if we don't have enough open source ability to know where the models are and to have redundant backups, that we could have this Orwellian 1984 reality where people start censoring the words in the models. And you're just like, I remember when everybody used to talk about freedom. I could see that kind of fear more than the models like collapsing. I think it's quite the opposite. I think the models are just going to go so profoundly off the rails smart that we're not going to know what to do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. No, what were you going to say?
I'm happy to talk again anytime. This has been a great conversation.
Well, what single process or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time saving impact?
I would have to still give it to either ChatGPT, just in general, because they keep doing such a good job that, like, even though it's still their world that you're playing in, it's not like you're implementing it all the way unless you really get in the back and use the APIs. Anytime I bring a person in and say, you should use this, check it out, like they start to be like, oh, wow, I can get more out of the day. I would also say that, Bolt and Lovable are just wild. Like if you just really think
Mhm.
about what that, and I was a guy, I spent so much of my own money building out tech, being obsessed with my idea that would turn out to be wrong. You lose tons of time and money where you're doing it the old way, which used to be very expensive and very slow. I'm talking years to get to a point where you'd finally have to shoot the idea in the head and millions of dollars, right? Now, you could literally do this thing on your own over a couple months, and I don't know how to put a tag on that. Like that is so profound that it's not that it's implemented all the way in some way where it's like provable, but I see it and I see how rapid and radical it is that I don't even know how to measure. It's just been crazy how radically different that is to be able to just chat and have a code come out, the prototype that could turn into a business. Like that is just insane. So I would give it to Bolt. I'd give it up to Lovable, Bolt, Cursor, all these guys. Like I think they're doing great work and it's feeding off each other. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this was just a pleasure to talk to you, Shawn. One last time, it is saltlending.com. Learn more information there. You're welcome back anytime, man. You have an open
Yes.
invite.
Yeah, I would love to follow up again. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I'll let you have after the time. Thanks to the audience. Looking forward to hearing from anybody who wants to talk. We'll talk again soon.